We begin this hour on Capitol Hill, where GOP lawmakers are threatening to conduct their own probe into the January 6th Capitol riot after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected two of Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's picks for the Select Committee. Congressman Jim Jordan and Jim Banks are two of five Republicans handpicked by McCarthy. Both Jordan and Banks voted to reject the 2020 election results. Now McCarthy is threatening to pull the other three Republicans he picked. He argues Speaker Pelosi is playing political games and is not interested in getting to the bottom of what happened on that day.
This represents something that has not happened in the House before for a select committee by the historian. It's an egregious abuse of power. Pelosi has broken this institution.
For more, I'd like to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Hi, Nikole. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy says he plans to pull all of his nominations for the January 6th Select Committee now and begin a separate probe. If that were to happen, what would that look like? Would that probe get as much attention as the Select Committee?
Well, it still remains to be seen. Leader McCarthy was asked about that, but he didn't provide a lot of specifics in terms of how they do plan to proceed. But he did say that, he and the other members still have a lot of questions. And to a certain extent, they wanted to turn the tables on Speaker Pelosi about what she might have known and some of the calls she may have been involved in that day. But that being said, this really now turns into a very fractured process. The Select Committee, to the best of our knowledge, does intend to move forward. There is a hearing scheduled for next Tuesday, where this committee will hear from law enforcement officers who are on the front lines January 6th. And, Benny Thompson, the Democratic chair of the Select Committee, made clear that, they have a quorum, they have enough people to proceed, irrespective of the minority leaders' picks. And so I would assume that would hold now that it appears the leader is pulling them.
Right. And Nikole, to that point, Representative Liz Cheney is still a member of the Select Committee. So, despite McCarthy's threats, there is still a Republican who's on the committee. It is still technically a bipartisan committee, correct?
Well, from that standpoint, yes. But, I think the hope was that there would be more of a bipartisan effort here. Initially, when there was talk or a push to do an independent 9/11 style commission, at the time, the framework that had been agreed upon would have allowed an equal number of Republican and Democratic appointees. If I remember correctly, I believe it was 5 apiece. So this kind of changes the dynamic here. If there's just one lone Republican. But that being said, as you mentioned, Republican leaders insist they will now kind of pursue their own investigation. We have seen them try this strategy before, for instance, with the coronavirus. Many Republicans, House Republicans, believe that there should be a full-fledged investigation into the origins of the coronavirus, and they set up their own committee to do that. So, this would be in that vein, hypothetically, but, it does make one wonder if, at the end of the day, that's the best course of action, considering, most parties involved really do want that bipartisan process to proceed. And we saw over on the Senate side that you had, a joint Senate panel made up of Republicans and Democrats that have already kind of started an investigation process, have already put out a report. The question is, why can't House Democrats and Republicans do the same?
Right. And, I'm curious, the GOP is saying that, Speaker Pelosi is more interested in playing politics than getting to the bottom of what happened there. Is there any advantage for her politically to exclude or to include these two picks of McCarthy's?
Well, look, as far as moving ahead with the Select Committee, the Speaker was always going to have the upper hand, and she did retain that veto power. And so that's why the leader was asked today, why not agree with the agreement that actually lawmakers had arrived at, months before, where there would have been more of this bipartisan, equal split among Republicans and Democrats on the panel. And that was something where we saw even the the minority leader at the time appoint, Congressman John Katko to kind of head those bipartisan negotiations. They ultimately came up with this, model for the Prospective Commission, and then, Leader McCarthy and Republican leadership at the end of the day decided not to support that. So, where this all goes from here remains to be determined. I think, from the perspective and having talked to a lot of these families and officers who were involved that day, they just want answers. They don't want a lot of politics in this process at all. They could care less about all the finger pointing. They just want to know what happened and why. And so while there have been differences between Democrats and Republicans over the scope of the panel, over the nature of the panel, over the makeup of the panel, I think these families and officers were really hopeful that at the end of the day, these lawmakers could kind of come to some kind of agreement here. And even with the select committee, we saw many of the officers and family members on the Hill when that legislation passed the House. So they were hopeful, but I can only wonder what they might be thinking now, seeing that this has once again devolved into politics again.
Is there a chance, though, after sort of tempers cool off, that perhaps McCarthy's other three picks will stay on the committee? I wonder whether he's worried about the optics of this high-profile committee going forward with hearings that are likely to get a lot of media attention without more Republican allies sitting there on the committee.
Based on his comments at this press conference that he held late this afternoon, it seems unlikely. He, in essence, said that, it's kind of this group or nothing, and that, they would proceed on their own course, and that they, too, are interested in getting at the bottom of this and what happened that day, but just from a different vantage point. And so that does seem the path that the leader plans to go down now. It seems very unlikely at this point that the remaining members, because again, they all appeared at this press conference and they all expressed their disappointment with the speaker's decision. But at this point, it does seem like an all or nothing proposal. And I think in this case, the leader is just going to proceed down his own path.
All right. Well, Nikole Killion on Capitol Hill, thank you so much.
You bet.